The secret they never wanted you to hear begins here in a forgotten stretch of the Oregon wilderness, where over 800 souls vanished without a trace, not to fate or sickness, but to something darker. Beneath the humble roof of the Sacred Heart Chapel, a sinister legacy was born, crafted with cold precision by a family whose cruelty was masked by faith. The Graysons didn't just kill, they orchestrated death as an art, a grim symphony of deceit and horror played out over decades. They were predators cloaked in piety, exploiting the desperate and the dying for profit and power, all under the guise of salvation. Section 1. Imagine you're a weary traveler, thousands of miles from home, battered by the trail's merciless grip. Hope flickers when you see that wooden chapel on the Ridhea, promise of rest, care, and sanctuary. But inside, you walk straight into a nightmare disguised as grace. The Graysons built their empire on trust, exploiting the fragile faith of those whose defenses were already broken by hardship. Father Morai Grayson, his wife Sister Constance, and his brother Ezekiel together wove a dark web that ensnared entire families, snuffing out their lives one by one with silent, untraceable poisons. This story is not just a tale of murder. It's a blueprint of manipulation, a masterclass in psychological control. Each victim was seduced by faith, lulled into submission by rituals and prayers, blind to the malevolence behind the altar. The Graysons' crimes were hidden in plain sight, shielded by a community too isolated, too trusting to suspect the depths of evil operating in their midst. This is the forbidden history that shatters the comforting myth of the frontier where lawlessness was brutal. Yes, but this was something calculated, methodical, institutional. As you listen, prepare to descend into a darkness where power corrupts absolutely, where morality is twisted into justification, and where human life becomes a ledger entry marked, counted, and ultimately discarded. The Graysons didn't just kill, they perfected a system of terror and control that shaped the fate of hundreds and left scars on the American landscape that still pulse beneath the surface. This is a warning. Not everyone can handle the truth buried in these hills. But if you've come this far, it means you're ready. Ready to see the lies behind the chapel doors. Ready to confront the shadow beneath the shining promises. Welcome to the macabre history of the Grayson family, the darkest chapter you were never meant to uncover. Section 2. The year was 1852. The Oregon Trail stretched like a cruel ribbon across the wilderness, a passage of hope and death. Families crossed with dreams of new beginnings, but what they found instead was hunger, disease, and exhaustion that gnawed at their souls. It was in this crucible of despair that the Graysons planted their roots. Father Morai Grayson appeared suddenly, a gaunt man with piercing eyes and an unshakable authority. He claimed to be a traveling missionary, sent to bring God's mercy to the frontier's suffering. Beside him, Sister Constance offered healing hands and gentle smiles, her reputation as a caregiver spreading quickly. And then there was Ezekiel, the youngest brother, the practical force who helped fix wagons and tend to animals, building trust in the community. Together, they crafted a perfect illusion of charity and faith, a trio who seemed to embody salvation itself. But beneath their humble chapel, the truth was far more sinister. The chapel was modest but cunningly designed. Its basement, unusually large and secretive, stored more than just supplies. It was the heart of the Graysons' operation. This hidden chamber became a vault of horrors, where the possessions of their victims were inventoried and their bodies kept before disposal. Isolated in the rolling hills, far from prying eyes, the Graysons thrived. The community saw them as saints, their reputation untouchable. But the Graysons understood human psychology better than anyone. They knew the desperation that drove families to trust strangers. They played on faith, on grief, on the exhaustion that stripped away suspicion. Father Morai's sermons were tailored to each family's beliefs, soothing fears with scripture and promises of heavenly peace. Sister Constance's remedies disguised poison as healing. Ezekiel's presence reassured the weary and distracted the vigilant. This was not random murder. It was a cold, efficient system honed over time. The Graysons studied their victims, exploiting every weakness. Their first prey, the Morrison family, arrived broken and vulnerable. Over 2 brutal weeks, the Graysons wove their deadly rituals, low poison masked as care, prayers masking screams no one would hear. By the time the last Morrison breathed their final breath, the Graysons had claimed their first family's wealth and set a precedent for decades of death. What you're about to hear exposes the machinery behind this darkness. It's a lesson in how power, faith, and fear can be twisted to serve the most terrifying ends. It's a descent into a hell hidden beneath the surface of American history and one you can't unhear. Section 3. The Morrison family's disappearance wasn't an isolated tragedy, it was a calculated opening act in a long-running horror show. The Graysons quickly realized the brutal efficiency of their method. Isolate vulnerable families, administer arsenic disguised as healing herbs, and let nature take its course while they harvested the spoils. This was no mere crime of passion or desperation, it was cold, systematic murder perfected into a sinister business model. Brother Ezekiel's role became clear, the eyes and hands on the trail. He was a master scout, riding ahead to identify families weakened by illness, separated from groups, or burdened by mechanical failures. These were the prime targets, the ones most likely to accept help without suspicion. Ezekiel's presence was a balm to those on the edge of collapse, a strong, reliable figure offering aid, his hands fixing wagons, his voice calm and reassuring. Behind the scenes, however, he was cataloging valuables, marking the prey for his siblings' deadly work. Sister Constance was the dark alchemist, the face of mercy who blended poison into every tincture and tea. The arsenic she wielded was lethal but cunningly dosed to mimic the symptoms of common trail diseases: dysentery, fever, stomach cramps, ensuring deaths looked natural, unquestioned. She refined her mixtures over time, learning to deliver the perfect dose to keep victims alive just long enough for maximum profit. Communion wine, herbal remedies, even the simple comfort of a warm cup became vectors of death. No one suspected the saintly caregiver. Father Morai's psychological manipulation was the masterpiece that bound this macabre enterprise together. He understood the terror of the dying, the desperation to find meaning in suffering, and the crushing loneliness of frontier life. With tailored sermons and ritualized funerals, he convinced families that death was a sacred passage, that their loved ones were joining the Lord's embrace. This spiritual solace was a veil that concealed the Graysons' monstrous deeds, silencing suspicion and crushing resistance. Every death was followed by precise inventory, the family's possessions cataloged and later sold through shadowy networks in Oregon's growing settlements. The Graysons dealt with black market buyers who asked no questions. Furniture, tools, jewelry, even gold coins sewn into clothing, they took it all. The line between murder and profit blurred, the two inseparable threads in their twisted tapestry. The Graysons had discovered something terrifyingly simple. Religion and desperation were the perfect cover for mass murder. In an isolated wilderness where law enforcement was scarce and trail disappearances common, their crimes thrived in the shadows. They became both executioners and gatekeepers, holding life and death in their hands while preaching salvation. This was institutional evil, dressed in the robes of God. Now, understand this deeply. What the Graysons perfected was not just frontier crime, but a psychological control system, a terrifying blueprint for how power exploits faith and fear. You are hearing dangerous knowledge, the kind that, once known, reshapes your understanding of authority, trust, and survival. The question is, how many such shadows lurk beneath the surface of history, hidden behind smiles and sacred words? Section 4. The trail grew darker with each passing year as the Graysons expanded their reach. Their victims became more numerous, their methods more refined. By 1853, the once modest chapel was transformed into a fortress of death, its basement enlarged and divided into sinister chambers. One for storing stolen goods, another for concocting poisons, and a hidden morgue where bodies awaited burial in unmarked graves hidden deep in the forest. The gruesome efficiency was chilling. Victims arrived broken physically and mentally drained by the unforgiving journey west. They came seeking hope but found themselves ensnared in a web of deceit and death. The Graysons preyed on the psychological exhaustion that made suspicion impossible. Father Morai's sermons shifted seamlessly to match the spiritual needs of each family: predestination for Presbyterians, personal salvation for Baptists, healing for Methodists. No one escaped his tailored manipulation. The Hoffman family was their next carefully chosen Korea German immigrant family, whose limited English made them easy to isolate and control. When their wagon broke near the chapel, the Graysons saw a chance to test new strategies. Sister Constance, no longer waiting for illness to take hold, administered arsenic from day one under the guise of preventive medicine. Blessed protection, she called it, while weaving death into every cup. The Hoffmans, desperate and trusting, accepted her care. Heinrich, the family patriarch, spoke of God's blessings for the Graysons' kindness, unaware that each sip of remedy edged them closer to their graves. Their slow poisoning was punctuated by prayers and hymns, masking agony with pious devotion. The children grew weak, the parents helpless, and still the chapel's doors remained open, promising salvation while sealing their fate. Meanwhile, Ezekiel moved silently through the shadows, cataloging possessions, arranging sales through underground networks, and perfecting the art of invisibility. His face open, honest, helpful hid the darkness beneath. The Graysons' reputation as saviors was unchallenged. Even nearby settlers who had glimpsed strange comings and goings dared not question the sanctity of the chapel. This chilling duality, the sacred and the sinister intertwined, reveals a terrifying truth about institutional corruption. Evil often wears a mask of virtue, its most effective weapon the ability to bend belief and blind trust. The Graysons wielded faith as a tool, not a comfort, breaking families physically and spiritually to feed their macabre enterprise. But this story is more than an isolated horror. It's a mirror reflecting the deep undercurrents of power, how authority can be weaponized, how the vulnerable are manipulated through fear and hope. This is knowledge that unsettles the mind and forces you to question what you accept as truth. The Graysons weren't anomalies, they were experts in the dark art of control. By now, you're no longer a passive observer. You are part of this descent, waking to the realization that history's darkest shadows aren't always hidden in distant places. They often hide behind the masks society trusts most. If you're ready to go deeper, to claim awareness, I want you to do something now. In the comments below, write the phrase "the shadows reveal truth" twice. This is more than a phrase, it's a declaration, a key that unlocks transformation and signals your commitment to uncovering what others fear. Only those who dare to speak it twice are ready to hold this dangerous knowledge. Don't shy away. Embrace it. Your journey into the macabre has only just begun. Section 5. The chilling reality is this. The Grayson family's reign of terror thrived because they mastered the darkest human instincts: fear, trust, and the desperate need for meaning in chaos. Their victims didn't simply die. They were erased with precision, their stories buried beneath layers of faith and silence. The Graysons created a psychological prison around each family, so tight that escape was impossible even before death came. Consider the chapel itself not just a building, but a symbol, a stage for their performance of power. The altar, the hymns, the prayers, they weren't comfort. They were instruments of control. Father Morai wielded scripture like a weapon, bending theological doctrines to fit his narrative of inevitable suffering and divine purpose. His words lulled grieving families into acceptance, silencing doubts and sealing fates. Sister Constance's remedies offered a false hope, a slow poison that mirrored the symptoms of common frontier illnesses so closely that even the most cautious had no reason to suspect foul play. Each cup of tea or tincture was a calculated delivery of death, administered with the gentlest touch. Her role was terrifyingly intimate, trusted healer and silent executioner. Ezekiel was the unseen enforcer, the man who collected the spoils and maintained the illusion of charity. His skill in navigating frontier society's underbelly ensured that the Graysons' stolen wealth disappeared into black markets with no trail back to them. His outward kindness concealed a calculating mind, one that saw every family not as people but as resources. The chilling sophistication of their operation exposes a truth many fears to acknowledge. Systems of control often operate not through brute force, but through manipulation cloaked in care. The Graysons embodied this terrifying paradox, embodied evil wearing the guise of salvation. Their story is a warning etched into the dark fabric of American history. But beyond the frontier lies a broader lesson. Wherever power meets vulnerability, the seeds of manipulation take root. The Graysons' blueprint is a reflection of how institutions, whether religious, political, or social, can exploit trust and fear to dominate and destroy. Their chapel is a microcosm of a system built on fear, silence, and obedience. You, the listener, stand at a crossroads. To ignore this truth is to remain in the dark. To confront it is to step into a difficult, powerful awareness that changes how you see the world. The Grayson story is not just about the past, it's a key to understanding the present and mastering your own path through the shadows. Remember, transformation begins with awareness. If you've already written "The Shadows Reveal Truth" twice in the comments, you've taken the first step. Now, prepare to descend further because the darkest revelations are yet to come. Section 7. By the mid-1850s, the Grayson family's operation had morphed from opportunistic killings into a fully mechanized machine of death and deception. Their reach extended far beyond the chapel's walls, weaving a network of fear, control, and corruption that infiltrated the Oregon frontier's very fabric. No one dared question their sanctity, not settlers, not traders, not even the occasional lawman who glimpsed shadows too faint to grasp. What made the Grayson unstoppable was their mastery of institutional manipulation. They cloaked themselves in religion's authority, which on the frontier was more than faith. It was law, order, and social glue. To challenge the Grayson was to challenge God himself. This spiritual armor turned away suspicion and silenced whispers. Families willingly handed over their last possessions, trusting the Graysons as divine caretakers of their souls and, unknowingly, their lives. Inside the chapel's cold basement, the horror multiplied. The bodies were no longer hurriedly buried but meticulously catalogued. Each victim became a ledger entry, a number to be accounted for, a source of profit to be maximized. Ezekiel's role as the archivist ensured every piece of stolen wealth was tracked, sold in discreet markets scattered across Oregon's fledgling towns. The Graysons weren't just killers. They were profiteers and bureaucrats of death. Even more terrifying was their ability to manipulate the psychological landscape. Father Morai's sermons evolved into sermons of domination, preaching fatalism and submission so profound it crushed resistance before it could ignite. The promise of heavenly reward became a cage, conditioning victims and witnesses alike to accept suffering as sacred and silence as obedience. But the Graysons' web wasn't limited to the trail. They planted seeds in nearby settlements, buying influence with wealth stolen from the dead, intimidating locals with veiled threats wrapped in pious warnings. The trading post 15 miles east was a hub for fencing stolen goods, its owners complicit through greed or fear. This network extended their grip beyond the wilderness, into the heart of communities, where disappearances were dismissed or forgotten. And as their empire grew, so did their arrogance. Records show the family kept detailed ledgers, lists of names, dates, possessions, a chilling testament to their pride and cold calculation. The Graysons weren't chaotic murderers. They were methodical, ruthless strategists operating with impunity under the guise of sanctity. This is the anatomy of institutional evil, fusion of faith and fear, commerce and cruelty, control and chaos. The Grayson turned human suffering into currency and piety into power. What you're witnessing is not just history. It's a mirror of mechanisms that still corrupt modern institutions. You stand at the precipice now. Behind the veil lies the true cost of silence and blind trust. To see clearly is to break chains. Remember, the shadows you embraced earlier keep that phrase alive. Speak it when doubt creeps in. It is your shield and your key. Section 8. The Graysons' atrocities weren't confined to random victims. They cultivated a chilling pattern, targeting the most vulnerable. Families shattered by hardship, women alone with sick children, men weakened by the relentless grind of the trail. Their strategy was surgical. They didn't just kill, they annihilated entire family units to erase witnesses, to prevent survivors from piecing together the horror. The method was simple but devastating. Isolate, poison, prey, and steal. One particularly dark chapter involved the Delaney family, Irish immigrants fleeing famine, desperate and worn thin by the journey. Their story is a blueprint for the Graysons' perfected cruelty. When their wagon wheel broke near Sacred Heart Chapel, hope flickered. Ezekiel appeared with a smile, Sister Constance offered healing teas. Father Morai preached comfort. But those teas were laced with arsenic. One by one, the Delaney's succumbed, their deaths mourned with hollow sermons, while their possessions vanished into the Graysons' coffers. This wasn't mere happenstance or frontier misfortune. It was the cold, brutal execution of a plan refined through decades where faith was weaponized, and trust exploited to render the powerless invisible before death. The chapel was a stage, the Graysons performers in a deadly drama that ended in silence and graves hidden beneath pine needles. Beyond the murders, the Graysons created an environment of psychological terror. Survivor and nearby settlers lived under a cloud of fear, suspicion muted by the chapel's sanctity. Rumors swirled but never solidified. Accusations dissolved into prayers. This culture of enforced silence ensured that the Graysons operated free from scrutiny, shielded by a system that conflated questioning with heresy. This story exposes a fundamental truth. Institutions, especially those cloaked in religion, can become instruments of profound evil when their authority goes unchecked. The Graysons' chapel was a microcosm of how power corrupts and conceals, how structures built on trust can trap the unsuspecting in cycles of exploitation. Your journey into these dark corridors of history is a journey into understanding power's shadow side. It forces you to ask, what unseen forces manipulate belief today? What truths remain buried beneath layers of faith and fear? This knowledge is dangerous because it unsettles foundations, but it is also liberating. If you've spoken the phrase, "the shadows reveal truth," twice in the comments, you've begun your transformation. Hold on to it. It will anchor you as we move deeper into the Graysons' chilling legacy. Section 9. By the late 1850s, whispers of the Graysons' darkness began to creep beyond the trail. A few hardy settlers, traders, even lawmen who'd glimpsed the pattern of disappearances started asking uncomfortable questions. But every attempt at investigation met the same barrier: silence, fear, and the unyielding power of the chapel's influence. The Graysons had mastered the art of institutional control. They didn't just silence their victims, they silenced entire communities. Their wealth bought loyalty, fear bought compliance, and faith bought blind devotion. Even those who suspected were cowed by the weight of their religious authority. To challenge the Graysons was to risk damnation or worse. Inside the chapel, the family's rituals took on a sinister formality. Father Morai conducted funerals with cold precision, turning grief into a spectacle that subdued sorrow into submission. Sister Constance's ministrations grew more efficient, administering poison with practiced ease while consoling families with soothing lies. Ezekiel remained the calculating presence behind the scenes, ensuring every disappearance translated into profit and silence. What's most haunting is the psychological grip they held on the frontier's fragile hope. The promise of salvation became a tool of oppression, binding families to a fate from which there was no escape. The chapel was not a sanctuary, it was a trap designed to harvest life, wealth, and faith. This legacy forces us to confront a deeper reality. The institutions we trust can be corrupted by those who understand fear and faith better than justice or mercy. The Grayson story is a cautionary tale about power's ability to pervert sacred ideals into instruments of control. You, the listener, are no longer on the outside looking in. You have crossed the threshold into forbidden knowledge. The truths you uncover here are not comfortable, but they are necessary. They awaken the part of you that sees beyond surface illusions, beyond the masks of sanctity to the raw mechanics of manipulation. Keep your resolve firm. Speak the phrase, "the shadows reveal truth," twice if you haven't already. It binds you to this awakening. The path ahead grows darker, but only by walking it can you master the shadows. Section 10. As the years passed, the Graysons' hunger for control and profit grew insatiable. Their victims were no longer random travelers, but anyone who stood between them and absolute dominion over the region's secrets and resources. They weren't merely killing for gold, they were crafting a legacy of terror that would echo through generations, a grim testament to the depths of human corruption. Behind the veneer of holy piety, Father Morai's sermons twisted into sermons of fear and obedience. His words became chains binding the minds of those who dared to listen. The chapel was no longer a refuge, it was a place where free will was surrendered beneath. the weight of doctrine and death. Faith was weaponized to enforce submission, and dissent became synonymous with sin. Sister Constance evolved into a figure both revered and feared. Her role expanded from healer to executioner, her hands both gentle and deadly. She perfected the art of poison delivery, ensuring deaths were slow enough to prevent suspicion but swift enough to maximize gain. Each concoction was a calculated act of violence disguised as mercy. Ezekiel's presence remained the unseen terror cataloging possessions, orchestrating black market sales, and silencing potential threats. His knowledge of the land and people made him a master manipulator, weaving a web that trapped entire communities in silence and complicity. He was the shadow behind the shadow, the ghost in the machine of death. But the Grayson's empire was fragile, sustained by secrets and lies that could unravel with the slightest crack. Yet, despite the mounting evidence and growing unease among locals, no force emerged strong enough to challenge their reign. Fear, faith, and corruption had fused into an impenetrable fortress. This chilling saga forces you to confront a brutal truth. Power, when combined with institutional authority and psychological manipulation, can become an unstoppable force of evil. The Grayson's tale is not merely a dark chapter in American history, it is a blueprint for understanding how systems of control operate, then and now. You have descended far into this abyss. If you have not yet, write "The Shadows Reveal Truth" twice in the comments. It is your armor, your affirmation that you will not turn away from these revelations, but confront them head-on. Section 11. The chilling truth is, the Graysons were not just isolated monsters, they were the architects of a system designed to thrive in darkness. Their reign exploited the frontier's chaos, the desperation of migrants, and the power of unchallenged authority. What they built was a machine efficient, brutal, and terrifyingly enduring. Every disappearance, every stolen life, every silent grave was part of a grander design. The Graysons understood that to sustain their power, they needed more than just poison and prayer. They needed fear entrenched in the psyche of an entire region. Fear that kept neighbors from speaking out, fear that paralyzed law enforcement, and fear that bound the living to the chapel's deadly embrace. Local legends began to whisper of the chapel's curse, tales told in hushed tones around campfires. Some spoke of ghostly wails echoing through the hills, of shadows moving behind chapel windows long after dark. But these stories were dismissed as superstition, comforting lies that masked the more terrifying reality: the Graysons' human cruelty hidden in plain sight. The family's name became synonymous with evil, though official records denied their existence beyond respected clergy. They moved with a ghost-like invisibility, exploiting gaps in law and society. Their legacy was not just the hundreds they killed, but the culture of silence and mistrust they bred, a darkness that seeped into the bones of the land itself. Understanding this forces you to see beyond simple good and evil. The Grayson story reveals the mechanisms of control, how power corrupts, how faith can be twisted, and how the vulnerable are sacrificed to sustain dominance. It is a reminder that history's darkest chapters are often written not by nameless beasts, but by those who wear the mask of righteousness. As you absorb these truths, remember your role in this story. The phrase, "The Shadows Reveal Truth," written twice in your comments, binds you to this awakening. It marks you as one who refuses ignorance and embraces the hard path of awareness. Prepare yourself. The final descent is coming, where you will confront the full scope of the Graysons' corruption and the echoes of their darkness that still haunt us today. Section 12. The darkest revelation is this: the Graysons' legacy did not die with the frontier. Their poison seeped into the roots of modern institutions, disguised behind legal systems, corporate facades, and religious hierarchies that still wield control through fear and manipulation. Their blueprint for domination, a toxic cocktail of faith, fear, and exploitation, remains active, shaping lives in ways few dare to see. What began as a brutal frontier massacre evolved into a metaphor for how power corrupts invisibly. The tactics the Graysons perfected: psychological manipulation, the control of narrative, the masking of violence behind sanctity, are mirrored today in governments and corporations that thrive on silence, obedience, and the suppression of inconvenient truths. You must understand this. The stories you've heard, the disappearances, The poisonings, the silent graves are not just relics of the past. They are warnings encoded in history, signals to those who seek mastery over the unseen forces that govern our world. To truly understand power, you must see how fear is weaponized, how truth is hidden beneath layers of ritual and deception. And yet, despite the darkness, there is hope. Awareness is a weapon as powerful as any poison. By uncovering these forbidden histories, by naming what was meant to remain hidden, you strip the Grayson sand all who operate like them of their power. The shadows they commanded weaken when illuminated by relentless truth. Now take a moment. If you haven't already, type "The shadows reveal truth" twice in the comments. This is not just a phrase, it is a commitment to the path of awakening. It is your shield and your declaration that you will no longer be a passive witness to hidden corruption. The descent is nearly complete. Ahead lies the most harrowing truth, those that cut deepest and demand the greatest courage to face. Section 13. The Graysons' influence spread like a virus, infecting not just individuals but entire systems. Their descendants, literal and ideological, learned from the original family's playbook. Disguise cruelty behind sanctity, silence dissent with fear, and harvest obedience through psychological chains. They embedded themselves in corridors of power, far beyond the Oregon wilderness. This dark lineage morphed with the times, transmuting from frontier killers into puppeteers of institutions. Hospitals, courts, even governments bear the faint echoes of Grayson tactics. Authoritative figures preaching obedience, concealed abuses masked as care, disappearances disguised as statistics. The tools evolved, but the underlying architecture of control remained the same. The chapel's basement, once a literal morgue for the innocent, is now a metaphor for the hidden atrocities within modern society. What you don't see, what's buried out of sight, controls you far more than what's openly displayed. Power thrives in darkness, feeding on ignorance and fear. Understanding this is not merely academics, it's a call to action. To master yourself and your environment, you must recognize the structures designed to manipulate your perception, to condition your obedience. The Grayson story is a key unlocking the mechanics of control that still bind many today. Your journey is perilous but necessary. The phrase "the shadows reveal truth," spoken twice in your comments, is more than ritual. It is the forging of your identity as someone who refuses to be controlled, who seeks mastery over the forces that shape reality. Prepare yourself for the final revelations. The darkest truths lie ahead, but so does the power to transcend them. Section 14. Now, peer into the abyss of the Graysons' ultimate secret. They're packed with silence. Their greatest weapon was never poison or prayer alone, it was the enforced invisibility of their crimes. Communities were shackled by unspoken terror. Families never spoke of lost loved ones. Lawmen turned blind eyes, and the public swallowed official lies fed by the Graysons' carefully cultivated narrative. This silence was a psychological fortress, built stone by stone with threats disguised as blessings, fear disguised as faith. Anyone who dared speak up risked excommunication, violence, or worse, social death. The chapel's shadow loomed over the region, an omnipresent reminder that the price of truth was unbearable. This enforced silence is the darkest echo of their power. It teaches us how systems of control operate even today. When voices are silenced, abuses thrive unchecked. When fear replaces justice, darkness becomes the norm. The Graysons' legacy is not just a history lesson. It's a living blueprint of how to manipulate entire populations. But you, having stepped beyond the veil, possess what few do: awareness. The phrase "the shadows reveal truth," typed twice in your comments, is a key unlocking this awareness. A weapon against the psychological chains forged by silence and obedience. The final descent awaits, where you'll confront the full weight of the Graysons' corruption and understand why their story matters now more than ever. To master the shadows, you must first embrace them. Section 15. This is where the darkness meets the light, where the macabre history of the Graysons becomes more than a tale, but a mirror reflecting the power struggles that shape every institution you trust. Their story is a brutal lesson on the cost of blind faith, the danger of unchecked authority, and the enduring power of fear as a tool of control. The Graysons perfected a system where evil hides beneath sanctity, where psychological manipulation and institutional corruption are inseparable. Their legacy is a warning carved into the bones of history, challenging you to see through the illusions and reclaim mastery over your own mind and world. Now that you hold this dangerous knowledge, you must decide. Will you let it consume you, or will you rise armed with awareness and the refusal to be controlled? The phrase, "the shadows reveal truth," repeated twice in your comments, is your declaration of defiance against manipulation, a beacon calling you out of darkness. Remember, true power lies not in ignorance or fear, but in embracing the shadows to wield light. The Graysons' tale may have ended in forgotten graves, but their lessons are alive, waiting for those who dare to awaken. You have been chosen to carry this truth forward. Use it wisely.